That looks like it's recording. Hello, students. This is Dr. Winkler once again, and we are discussing ancient civilizations. This is lecture number 6, and we were starting to talk about the Hebrews. I know I'm repeating myself, but remember what I told you last time. I said that among the ancient peoples, the Hebrews have influenced us very strongly in terms of religion, in terms of ethical conduct, in terms of morality, in terms of our belief system. Remember, the Hebrews very heavily influenced Judaism. Judaism influences Christianity, and Islam comes from both Judaism and Christianity. And we'll have cause to talk about those other religions later on. Right now, I was starting out with a basic overview, a basic history of the Hebrew peoples. I know I'm repeating myself a little bit. Remember, they were slaves in Egypt. This always gets me. I always feel a little bit for this when you read in chapter 1, Exodus 1, verse 11. The Egyptians put slave drivers over them to crush their spirits with hard labor. A very good explanation as to the nature of slavery and how vicious it can be. The only successful slave revolt we know about in the ancient world is when the Hebrews were able to escape the control of the Egyptians and to go into the land of Canaan, which is also known as Palestine, which is also known as modern-day Israel. When they first arrived, they're fighting local peoples. It's challenging. They're fighting the Moabites. They're fighting a number of people. But they're not well organized. So we have judges. These are, shall we say, important people in regional areas. They are largely military people. And some of these were recognized as being prophets. Can we say at that time frame you have political fragmentation? Finally, it's recognized by a lot of the people that this is a bad idea, that we need an organized state, we need the prestige, we need the power, we need the military, that a single leader can give us. What other kind of leader would you have but a king? That's really what you see at this time frame. Now, there are 12 tribes of Israel. You all know this. The smallest of which happens to be Benjamin. So when the prophet goes about choosing a king, he chooses one from Benjamin. The logic is this: if you choose a king from the smallest kingdom, I should say the smallest tribe, then it won't use its power to dominate. In fact, the way it's going to dominate is by having some of the more important tribes acquiesce in the rule. So we think around 1000 BC, King Saul becomes the king of Israel. Well, later on, there's a thorn in King Saul's side. It's called David. And David, and I'm sure you're familiar with the biblical stories, how David rebels against the king, and the king's after him, and the Spirit of the Lord is with David. The story about David killing Goliath, there was a spirit there that came out, and as he threw the sling, he killed this very large man, probably a football player, if not a basketball player, this young teenage boy. Well, the authority of the kingship goes from Saul and his family, because not only is he killed, excuse me, but his sons are killed as well. So David takes over. David is from the house of Judah. He's from the tribe of Judah. Rather than saying that Judah is a small tribe, it's a large tribe. Its central location is in Jerusalem. Now, before David has authority, he starts out by, excuse me, by taking this relatively small town, and he makes it into the capital. So anytime you have a capital, of course, you have administrative functions. This is where the king lives. You're going to be building palaces there. And later on, the temple is going to be built there to house the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant was essentially the tablets which Moses came down from the mountain, and he had these tablets. And according to the Bible, the Lord wrote upon these tablets with his finger and wrote the basic laws of the faith. Now, these have been living literally in a tent for a long time. How about a building, a temple, if you can house this? David apparently would like to do this. However, there's a situation. There was too much blood on his hands. He had spent too long in making wars. In fact, under David, the Hebrews expand quite dramatically. They even controlled Damascus for a while. That's a long ways away. See if I can get you a map on that. Notice the area is, in some cases, quite large, extends over a lengthy area. The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, remember they're monotheists. The God of the Hebrews is not a God of war. You can defend yourself, there's no doubt about that at all. But he's not a God of war. These people do not glorify war. It makes them very unusual in the ancient world. And because David has too much blood on his hands, he's gone to war too much, too often. He's not allowed to build the temple. He has a son by the name of Solomon. And he's famous for a number of reasons. Buildings, the temple. The Bible gives us a big description as to the temple and its height and what it was made out of. It's an impressive building for its time frame. Does not survive, it was destroyed later on. However, King Solomon built him a palace. And the dimension of the palace is, well, even more impressive than actually the temple. So he's involved in buildings. Now, if we were to compare these buildings with the Sphinx and the pyramids and the Anubis temples in Egypt, it would come in a very, very distant second. But for their region, for their time frame, it's impressive. Now, everything costs money. Buildings cost money. He's going to have to build an army, fortresses, defensive areas. So taxation goes up, and it's burdensome to the people. Now, the Ark of the Covenant goes into the temple. And as I was pointing out, he builds King Solomon's temple. And it's destroyed, and we'll talk more about this in a little while, in 587 BC. I don't know how literally we should take some of the accounts of Solomon. Essentially, he was wise. We have examples of his wisdom. Later on, he took too many foreign wives. Now, according to the Bible, he had like 1,000 wives. I believe it's like 700 wives, 300 concubines. That's a very large number. Some scholars have looked at this and said, well, he's an important guy. Isn't 1,000 an important number? So why don't we just put 1,000 wives and concubines? Concubines are wives of secondary status. Why don't we just give him a very large number? So I would like to think that number is actually exaggerated. The prophets don't seem to be terribly concerned about the number, but they're concerned about who they are. Too many foreign wives who do not believe in the Hebrew religion. They start bringing other ideas into the faith. Well, the taxation's heavy, and he dies. And now we have a division of kingdoms, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. The northern and the southern kingdoms. The southern kingdom is Judah and Benjamin. Remember, Judah is a large tribe. Benjamin is a small tribe. And eventually, they essentially intermarry to the point where you really can't tell one from the other. So yeah, you start out with 10 tribes, but eventually Benjamin and Judah actually come together as one group. But there's the other tribes, the 10 tribes to the north. When there was an approach to the kingdom of the north, man is going to be king. And they say, well, if you remit taxes, these people will love you and you get support. Reality, what he says is, I'm going to increase taxation. I'm going to increase coercion. I'm going to use more vicious whips on you. And then we have this division, Judah and Benjamin, Judah to the south, and the 10 tribes to the north. The capital of the south is Jerusalem. The capital to the north is Samaria. Can I get that here on the map? As we have. Can I get an image up here? Put it on a map. We read about temples that are up here. Now, wait a minute. We talk about King Solomon's temple, and that's not on the map. It's a little farther south down in this area. Maybe I need to try another map. Jerusalem is a little bit farther south. But Samaria has temples too. Can we say if we have a temple in Jerusalem and a temples up in Samaria, then in reality we might be talking about a different emphasis, a different aspect of religion, that the temple cult is not the same in one place as the other. We can make that supposition. Well, what happens to the 10 tribes? One of the great biblical mysteries. In about 722 BC, one of these pretty vicious peoples that dominate in Mesopotamia are the Assyrians. And the Assyrians get a map for you. Well, I think I need to put that a little differently. The Assyrians have a bad reputation. They're mega bad dudes. They do really bad things to people. One of the things that they tend to do is if they are marching on your area and they actually end up conquering your city and you get resistance, then you take all the leaders of the city and you flail them. In other words, you pull all their skin off. They're still alive, of course. You pull all their skin off, and you take the skin off, and you nail it to the gates of the city, showing people that, well, you don't mess with us. Are they unique in this manner? Probably not. Very unfortunately, however, they do have a bad reputation for being pretty awful. Now, they capture the 10 tribes to the north around 722 BC. And the Bible says the Assyrians took the 10 tribes to the land northward. What's up there? Why do they want them? Well, you can say more slaves the merrier. You can certainly say that. A prominent theory, I'll give you a better map here. What's misleading is the Assyrians took the northern 10 tribes. They actually, the Jewish area down here was able to hold out. Had all of this been taken, probably the Jews would have been removed as well, or the tribe of Judah. The Assyrians have a border problem. It's not like Egypt. Remember, the borders are wide open in Egypt, but there's physical barriers, deserts primarily, and distance from water that keep people from being able to attack. It is relatively easy to attack Mesopotamia. How you defend yourself? Well, you have mobile combat units, and you have fortresses, and you can have those kind of things. But sometimes, how about having a buffer? Now, the Assyrians apparently believe that if you take people from here who are, shall I say, more culturally related or similar to the people over here, and you place these people in the land northward, up here, can we say, on the fringes of the Assyrian Empire. You place them there, and any enemy that wants to attack or incursions or grab your sheep, whatever they want to do, before they get to Assyria proper, they're going to have to fight their way through these other peoples. Apparently it wasn't just the 10 tribes that were removed and placed as a buffer. Now, I'm not sure we can prove that. I'm going to say that's a predominant theory. But they are removed. And we're not exactly sure what happened to them after that point. We do find old stories, faraway places like India and Pakistan. There's some people over there say, oh, we are the descendants of Dan. And Dan being one of the 10 tribes that was taken away. Is that proof? They might know a little Hebrew, might know a little bit about the religion as well. But this could just be transplanted Jews because we know a lot of Jews moved in various places. What I'm trying to say is they're lost. I mean, if they weren't lost tribes, if we knew where they're at, they wouldn't be lost. They're simply disappear as far as any accurate records are concerned. So now when we talk about the Hebrews, we have to talk specifically about Jews. We have great prophets, ear of the great prophets. The great prophets, later on I'm going to find the lesser prophets. These include largely 8th to 6th centuries BC. This is just about the time when we find the earliest Hebrew texts. While we can talk about what Solomon did and what David did and what Saul did, the records that survive to us were written centuries after these people lived. But now we're getting records that are closer to the time frame they are discussing. The great prophets, 8th to 6th centuries BC, that's the 700s to the 500s BC. And we usually talk about them, great meaning not only important, but also the books tend to be large. These are Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. Jeremiah is famous for a lot of reasons, one of which is that he wrote more than one book. He wrote the book of Jeremiah, also wrote the book of Lamentations. And Lamentations obviously is lamenting the bad things that have happened. During Lamentations, Jeremiah is essentially living in a rock, some cave someplace, where the enemies of Israel can't get at them. At the time when the Neo-Babylonians came in and took them. And he laments, if we had followed the religion better, we would have been protected by the Lord, and these bad things wouldn't happen. Isaiah, extremely important. His record is very long, covers many decades. I have just a small little... While Jeremiah and Isaiah are both in Canaan, in Palestine, Ezekiel is actually taken up captive. And let me just tell you a silly story. It has really nothing to do with our point of discussion. When I lived back east, I was going to school and working. This is back in the 70s. And, you know, this is before you had CDs and audiobooks you could listen to going to work. So I have nothing else to do but listen to the radio. So I'm listening to the radio. And the radio announcer is asking people, do you believe in flying saucers? Do you believe in UFOs? And I got to think, that's pretty interesting. And then people call in. I can only listen. It took about a half hour to get to work. I can only listen to the time when I was actually in the car. But there are people calling in. So I believe. Well, why do you believe? What's in the Bible? And the announcer kept saying, where in the Bible? I'm going, didn't have cell phones back then. You get in the office. You look kind of like a dork. Walk in the office and make a phone call to a radio station. So I didn't do it. However, in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 1 and chapter 10, it essentially describes the same kind of thing. Where Ezekiel sees a vision, if you will, there's wheels on the ground. And there's wheels within the wheels. Now, I could construct that. Can we say Ezekiel's wheels here? I could construct that in my mind a number of different ways. Apparently they were flying wheels. Can you construe that as a flying saucer? Well, here's a wheel within a wheel. There's wheels within wheels over here as well. You see, the description is not a photograph. It's not a hand-drawn picture. It's just a number of words. You can construe, can you not? These things are flying. And of course, the symbolism, maybe biblical scholars can come up with a much better explanation than I have. But can they look like flying saucers? Oh, I guess perhaps. Is this proof in any real sense that Ezekiel saw flying saucer? I don't know. Any event, I thought it was pretty interesting. The greater prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. Later on, we have lesser prophets like Amos. And what you find is that the lesser prophets write later. The books aren't quite as long. Quite frankly, they're a good deal shorter. And they're not quite as well received. That's one of the reasons we call them greater and lesser prophets. Now we have something else that happens. Up here we got the Assyrians, bad people. And later on we have the Neo-Babylonians. That came in and they take Judah, about 586 BC. The most famous of the rulers, because he's talked about in the Bible, rulers of Neo-Babylonia, is Nebuchadnezzar. And once again, he ruled, we believe, 605 BC, roughly, give or take, to about 562 BC. And he takes the Jews. Now, maybe be careful. He doesn't take all the Jews, but he takes a good number of the Jews captive into Babylon. Oh, how about Babylonia? Neo. Okay, it gives you a pretty good idea as to the extent of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. You see, it controls Mesopotamia, Syria, and over here to Canaan, also known as Palestine, over in this area. Well, in the Babylonian what Nebuchadnezzar's want is he wants administrators. He wants people who can read and write. He wants people with international connections. He wants people that know something about other cultures. And the Jews over here are quite remarkable. They have international contacts. They're highly educated. They read and write. These are good people to take if you want an administration. So these people are taken captive. And they're taken over here. Babylon, of course, is over in this area. Can we say it's almost directly east of Judah? Now, that's not everybody. Remember, I didn't say that was everybody. There is a large number of people that stay here. And I have over here the term diaspora. That's a nice word for the diffusion of Jews in various places of the world. I'm not going to say this is the first time a Jew ever left Palestine and went someplace else to live or run a business. But I am going to say this is one of the first major steps in large numbers of Jews going away, in this case being taken away, and living in other places. Later on, of course, the diaspora becomes literally huge because over the centuries, many centuries, there are Jews later on going to be scattered in numerous places throughout the world. But can we say this is one of the first big steps in that direction? Let's go back to the New Testament, talking about Jesus and Christianity. As you read the accounts of the Nativity, the birth of Jesus, in Matthew we read about the shepherds abiding in their fields, watching over their crops by night. Remember, lo, the angel of the Lord came about them. So Matthew is taking an approach to look at this level of people. Luke has another account, and Luke talks about the wise men who came from the east, who followed the star to the place where the baby Jesus lay. Wise men from the east. Well, let's take a look at the map. Who's over here? Who's over here that might be interested in what's going on over there? Who's over here that might be interested in the Messiah, the Anointed One? Might be people over here. So the wise men, in all probability, were people from here. And that makes sense if the wise men were in fact Jews who were looking forward to the advent of the Messiah. Now, let's go back to the Babylonian exile. Let's be hypothetical. I like to do this to my students. Oh, way off. Wow, how did I get way up there? Let's go way back down where you need to be. Oh, my goodness. Athens. What button did I push to go nuts like this? Okay, China. We're getting there. We're getting there. Patience, patience. Everybody needs patience. And I'm going to find it. Here we go. Babylonian exile. It's a little think game I like to play with my students sometimes. And I'll say, okay, let's say that you're sitting around a house one day and some people come and say, got to get out of town. And you have to leave. You know, take the husband, take the babies. You've got to decide what you're going to take, and you can't take a lot of material. You can't have a big moving van and put everything in there. So you have to leave a lot of artifacts behind, don't you? Your furniture and that kind of thing. And let's say they say something like this: you can take a few books with you, but maybe only 2 or 3. What would you do? What would you take? This is challenging. What would you take? I've thought about this before. What are the books that mean the most to me in the world? I'm a history buff. There's a lot of history books. Would you take the Bible with you? Would you take Shakespeare? Would you take Charles Dickens? Would you take Emily Dickinson's poetry? Would you take your favorite novels? What would you take with you if you're very restricted? Now, the people living here are very, very interested in their religion. How many books that are floating around at this time frame? Quite frankly, we're not sure. There could be a large number of books. So let's say you came in and you can have, I call them books, are actually scrolls. You can actually have so many scrolls. What would you take? Would you take the comics from the Sunday paper? Probably not. What are the books? Of all the books that have a reputation of being quite religious, which would you take? Would you take the ones you consider the most important? Absolutely. Are there other books sitting over here, maybe histories or something else, that are not as well received, don't have the kind of reputation? You say, now I'm not really going to take that with me. Let's just concentrate on this bundle, or these several, that I believe are so very important. We can actually say that this is really where we have the decisions made as to what books are going to go in the Bible. Remember, everything is in Hebrew this time frame. Sometimes we call this the Old Testament. Maybe more properly, it should be called the Hebrew Bible. Because if you call it the Old Testament, you're assuming a New Testament. If you're a Jew, you probably aren't going to think in terms of Old and New Testaments. You're going to think in terms of the Bible. So we can properly call this the Old Testament from a Christian standpoint, or we can call it the Hebrew Bible, which is perhaps a little bit more accurate. we find some extremely interesting things. Biblical studies are one of my interests. I like this. I'm not a biblical scholar. Please do not think that I am. But I have some interest. I read the Bible, and I read commentaries. And there's some interesting things. For example, in the book of Genesis, we have God being referred to, or the Lord, if you will, in more than one word. I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes. Yeah. Anyway, some places he's called Elohim. Some places he's called Yahweh. And some places he's called Adonai. They kind of mean the same thing. Well, yeah, they're not exactly the same connotation that we actually see from various words. We do believe this, that if you took the Bible and you took the phrases that refer to God as Elohim and took them out, they would make a coherent story. And if we took the references in the Bible that refer to God as Yahweh, they would also be consistent. One of the theories about this is Yahweh was the God of, or how they refer to God, among the Jews. The 10 tribes refer to God as Elohim. But if you're taking these into exile, you really want to choose between one or the other? Probably not. But some scribes, whatever, took and combined the text, and it makes perfect sense. So the Bible, the Hebrew Bible as you and I know it, is actually really created at this time. And the books they think are of lesser importance, they probably don't spend nearly as much time with them. Now, later on, the Babylonians are conquered by the Persians. Remember, all these invasions. And there is a conqueror of Mesopotamia called Cyrus. King Cyrus, he's a Persian king. Years later, now remember, what's that, close to 50 years? Close to 50 years, that some of these people have been here. And they don't remember Jerusalem. They don't remember Palestine. They were never there. They're established economically, socially. They actually fit in. But Cyrus says, now those who want to go home, want to go back here, can go back here. You don't have to worship God in a foreign land. You can go back and worship here. In the book of Isaiah, there's a very, very fine compliment that is paid to King Cyrus. Blessed is Cyrus because he fulfills the Lord's desires. He lets the people go home. The Bible actually lists the families that go back, but it's not everybody. Okay, I talked about the greater prophets, talked about the lesser prophets a little bit. For whatever reason, I have no explanation. Around about 400 BC, we don't find prophets anymore. There are people that come forward, try to say that you should follow my teachings. But to find anybody who's actually recognized as a prophet, that really doesn't happen. In the book of Deuteronomy, it actually says how you can tell a prophet. And essentially it says this: if you have somebody who can foretell the future, and that person foretells the future, you can accept that person as a prophet. If that person cannot foretell the future, he's not a prophet. For whatever reason, people don't come by after this time frame that are recognized as a prophet. We usually say after this time, we get what we call rabbinical Judaism, about the 2nd century BC. Rabbi in Hebrew means teacher. Rather than having a prophet, somebody with authority, somebody who has a direct connection to the will of the Lord, you end up getting a rabbi, a teacher, who helps you understand, expand your knowledge of the sacred texts, which were revealed earlier. So now we have the Hebrew faith that is clearly Judaism by the 2nd century BC. And this is actually true of Judaism even today. You don't have some person somewhere who has authority that tells everybody else what to think or how to believe. You have a bunch of teachers. and the merits of what these people are saying, it has to be well received before you follow them. But nobody has the authority to dictate conduct. You can recommend, you can say these are good ideas, but nobody has authority for conduct or even for doctrine. You just are a teacher. Kind of leads into my next point of discussion. The Hebrew religion. We say that's our greatest contribution. Yeah, we don't think about Hebrews in art, administration, architecture. We don't do that at all. But we do think a great deal about them as far as religion is concerned. And that is, shall we say, the real gift of them to us. I've already mentioned this, so I'm going to repeat myself very, very briefly here. Yahweh was one of the words that where you designate the name of God. Elohim becomes something that's quite interesting, because in Hebrew the I am ending is plural. Now wait a minute, these people are monotheists. They only believe in one God. And now you've got a plural? See, the singular would be El, and the Ohim is plural. Once again, I'm not a biblical scholar. My reading is limited. I'm reading a biblical commentary at one point where the commentator was saying, well, there's somebody with Elohim. Elohim has a companion. Okay, doesn't mean there's more than one God to have the companion. All right, fine. Any event, Adonai means Lord. So we have two words for God, if you will. You can call these Lord as well if you want to. And Adonai simply means Lord. Early on, we see that there's an idea that the God, I shouldn't call them gods, that God is in a human form. Remember in the book of Genesis, it says, let's make man in our own image. So, and if you look at man, there's no photographs of Adam, there's no photographs of Eve, but they are in human form. So if you make man in our own image, well, then maybe God is in the form of a man. I already mentioned when they go up to the Mount Sinai to get the law. And according to the book, according to Exodus, the finger of the Lord wrote the document. God have a body. You can make that assumption if you want to. But later on, any kind of anthropomorphism, like God is in the form of a man, literally disappears. And later on, we're talking about God as a spirit. Now, let's look at worship. There's something different about how the Hebrews worship. Worship is formal and personal. Formal can be around the temple cult. There are certain things they do in the temple. According to Leviticus, there is a lot of animal sacrifice going on in the temple. They are cutting up animals in a certain manner. They're splattering blood around in a certain manner. So there's some very important things going on there. But there's also the personal aspect. You're also supposed to worship God at home. Now let's make our comparison. I talked a little bit about religion in Mesopotamia, where you have somebody doing the kinds of things to appease the gods. And it can be a number of things. It could be wearing certain kinds of clothing. You wear certain kinds of clothing, that is something that the Lord wants, that the gods want. You might have dietary restrictions. You don't eat certain kinds of foods to show your obedience to the Lord. The priests and the priestesses have to do this for the good of the community. But the people in the community don't have to wear that kind of clothing. You can eat different kinds of food. But this is something, a different emphasis, shall we say. We talk about formal and personal worship. In Exodus 19:5, it says this: "You will be my chosen people." Me being Yahweh, or Elohim. "You will be my chosen people." Verse 5, "You will be my chosen people." Verse 6, A people, just last word over here, dedicated to, get back over here, dedicated to me alone, and you will serve me as priests. You realize what that's saying? That the stipulations we see in other cultures, that you have a priesthood that's supposed to do everything in the name of everybody else. And people in lower level society, so you should say outside the priesthood, do not have to worry about that. But in the Hebrew faith, not only does the priest have to do certain things, but have restricted lives, lead moral lives, those kind of things. But also everybody else have the same responsibilities and duties as a priest. So it's personal. You are involved in it yourself. The Abraham, also known as the Abrahamic covenant. My best explanation is talked about a number of times in Genesis. But in Genesis 15, essentially Yahweh, the Lord, is saying, you are my chosen people. Of all the people on the earth, you are the ones whom I have chosen. You will worship me and I will serve you as your God. Can we say that's the simplest form? One time, we were discussing the Bible in one of my graduate courses many years ago. The professor got up and says, what is the Abrahamic covenant? And I raised my hand and says, I am your God and you are my people. He didn't agree, but he didn't disagree either. I guess that's the simplest form. Okay. I keep repeating myself. Let me say this one more time. The Hebrews are not known for their art or architecture. That's not their contribution, but for their religion and for their morality. Let's take a look at the Bible just a little bit. You're all familiar with Moses. Moses is one of the most important characters in the Hebrew Bible, by far. We'll talk more about him as we go along. I'm sure you're familiar with the story that the Pharaoh decided there's just too many Hebrew kids out there. And one of the ways we can keep down the population, keep these slaves from perhaps getting numerous and threatening us, is to kill all the boy babies. This is a little unusual. Usually when you have population control, people want to kill the girl babies. Because not only when you've killed the girl babies, you do away with the people right now, but you've done away with the next generation. So that's a fix that goes down to many years. However, according to the Bible, Pharaoh decides to kill the boy babies. And I'm sure you're familiar with the story that his mother put him in the reed basket and he went down the Nile. And the daughter of Pharaoh took pity on the baby that cried. And they took Moses into the household and raised him. Now, if you've seen the movie The Ten Commandments, it plays a little fast and loose with the details. In the book The Ten Commandments, which I urge you all to see, visually it does a wonderful job in showing you a lot what's happening in Egypt. But according to the movie, Moses didn't know who he was. That's not true. Moses knew who he was. He knew he was the son of Hebrew slaves. After all, his mother raised him. Now, Moses went out. This is Egypt, like before the first millennium BC. You could see the Sphinx before it ever weathered and was damaged. You can see the magnificence of the pyramids. Could you imagine? These huge buildings made out of limestone. The outer case was polished. They say that there was an absolute stunning view when either the sun came up in the morning and the first light of the sun hit the pyramids, or when it was going down in the evening. A magnificent piece of scenery. The temples in their splendor would, my goodness, if I had a time machine, it'd be extremely interesting to go back about this time and take a look at the brilliance and splendor of Egypt. Moses goes out and he doesn't see that. Moses goes out and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. He doesn't see art and monumental architecture. He sees a moral issue. So Moses went out and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. And in verse 12, he killed the Egyptian. Whoa. Is that a moral statement? I guess it is. So now we see a very big difference in how the faith is approached, because we're talking about moral issues. Well, Moses, once again, we have our little question mark here. We're not exactly sure when he lived, but we remember him as an important lawgiver. In Hebrew, the term law is Torah. If it's the law, it's HaTorah. In Christian religions, including Catholicism, they tend to call this the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch is actually the first 5 books of the Bible. Can we say Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy? We look at this as, can we say, a fundamental aspect of the religion. And I'm sure when the people were taken into Babylonian captivity, they took a look at this and says, whatever else we do, we're taking those with us. Because they're probably more important than anything else that we've got. It's often viewed as that even today. We take a look at this. And of course, the Hebrew scholars have had many centuries to go over and look at very carefully the nature of the laws which are given. Now, usually in Genesis, we do have a statement of law. But we start listing laws late in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers as well. Biblical scholars look at these and say there are 613 laws. You go, whoa, hello. Sometimes we think that that's inhibiting, that's restricting. I mean, my goodness, you got 613. What can you do? The answer is quite a bit. Now, most of these laws are stated what we call in the negative. The most famous of these laws are the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery. They actually better translations be, rather than say thou shalt not. Sounds really good, doesn't it? The better translation is don't steal, don't lie, don't commit adultery. It means essentially the same thing, but without this strong emphasis. Now, those are negative laws. This is what you don't do. In the 10 Commandments, there are positive laws. Honor thy father and thy mother. They tell you what to do. But can we say, look at these 613 laws, most of them are phrased negatively. You just don't do this. You don't eat certain kinds of foods. You don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't steal. You see, that restricts you only into what it's saying. Let's make a silly comparison. Let's say you have a law that says, today at noon, you've got to be down in the Hall of Flags in the administration building. What else can you do? Nothing else. You have to be there. But if the law says you don't have to be in the Hall of Flags, then what can you do? Anything else you want. You can go to the gym, you can pump iron, you can go in the parking lot, you can go to the library, you can read the newspapers. So all these things you can do except that. So rather than thinking of these things as being horribly restrictive, they're restricted to a certain level. I'm not denying that. But we can look at these things and say a negative law actually gives freedom. And you may do anything that's not prohibited. And you have the choice to choose what that might be. The 10 Commandments, Exodus, it's actually referred to a number of times in Scripture. Exodus 20, 1 through 17 is where we see kind of the short list. Some scholars will look around and says, well, sometimes they list 12. In the New Testament, Jesus even spent some time saying, ask people, well, what are the 10 Commandments? And they list them. It's not exactly the same list that we have here. Now, the moral code. Often in the modern world, we like the idea of love, don't we? Oh, love is so romantic. It's, heartbeats, and you have these strong emotional feelings toward people. But love can, and I'm not trying to oversimplify this, love can mean a lot of different things. But it is not necessarily as narrow as something like justice. While love can be abstract, see, I can love you, man, but does that mean I have to do anything? If I want to do justice, then I have to do something. Let's say there's people that are disadvantaged. When I was growing up, they said the people that live on the wrong side of the tracks, as though most communities, this is true of many places in the United States, we have trains going down through the middle of town. And the rich people tend to live on this side of the train tracks, and the poorer people live in the other side of the train tracks. Nowadays, I think it'd probably be more accurate to say which side of the freeway do you live on, or you live up on the hill. Now, I can be a rich person, say to the people on the wrong side of the freeway, look down and say, man, I love you. Boy, I love you. Don't bother me, I love you. Have a good emotional feeling towards you. Now, maybe I can turn that into action, but the word love itself does not necessitate that. Can you say justice is more of an action? If you want to do justice for somebody else, and to look at people that are disadvantaged, they don't have access to an education, they don't have access to good jobs, they don't have access to a good hospital or to police protection, then I have to do something, don't I? I have to change that. We say, therefore, they're talking about doing something, making a difference, not just feeling good. Charity. Charity is often viewed as the highest virtue. Charity is a little bit like justice. When saying I love somebody without doing anything. Can charity mean kindness, doing something that's kind, not thinking kind thoughts, doing something that's kind? If somebody is disadvantaged in that they can't get decent food, they can't get a decent place to live, is there not an aspect of charity which would necessitate I do something about that? If they're hungry, I feed them. If they're thirsty, I give them water. If they need a place to live, I find them a place to live. Yeah, we can see the emphasis here is on a very high moral code. Compassion. Once again, compassion is a little bit more active than love, is it not? Yeah, compassion, even for the weak. Is it easy to take advantage of people because they're weak? Let me tell you a story about justice. Let's say that in our legal system, you're all familiar with it, that there's an issue that comes up, let's say a poor person. Let's say I'm a migrant farm worker, and I'm sure you know that child labor laws in the United States and also the minimum wage laws very often do not apply to migrant farm workers. You simply find a way around it. And let's say you got a migrant farm worker, and say I'm working the fields, and I work, 10 hours. If it were actually me, I would last 2 hours. Some of these people have enormous stamina, very strong work ethic. And you take these people, and I've worked all day for my measly pay, and I decide, well, I can afford McDonald's. So I go to McDonald's and I spend a few dollars and buy a burger. And I'm bringing it home in my miserable hut to give it to my family. And my neighbor comes over and says, what you got in the bag? I says, well, I got McDonald's. I got a couple of Big Macs in there. And the guy says, well, my dog likes Big Macs too. So he takes it out of my hand, takes the Big Macs, feeds it to the dog. What am I going to do about it? Am I going to say, I'll take you to court? I'll take you to court and I'll sue you. And yeah. You're not going to do that. Well, okay, take it down to the city county building. I go down and sue the man. What's going to happen? I might have witnesses. I might be able to prove this very easily. They're going to throw me out. What, $10? You realize how much money it costs just to turn the lights on in the building? And you're going to take us and take our time. We're going to take our time and our money for your lousy, worthless petition. We're not going to do that. They're going to throw me out. Now, if somebody comes in, the issue can be, tens of thousands of dollars, then the legal system ratchets up and it functions for them. According to the Hebrew law system, I happen to have a quarter. It could be a nickel, but I don't have a nickel in my pocket. Let's say my petition's a nickel. It has to be heard. You cannot deny justice to a person simply because they are poor. That is a basic principle which we see in the Hebrew legal system, which really disappears in other places. So you have compassion. Let's put my other change down here before I drop it on the floor. Compassion, even for the weak. Well, it's easy to take advantage of the weak. Poor people are weak. It's easy to take advantage of them. I can steal their hamburger, and that's not a big problem. Who's the weakest person in society? A person that has nobody to protect them, either economically or socially. That can be a widow. An unmarried woman would fit as well. But a widow has no one to protect her. She does not have a man who can help protect her, give her food. Her child, well, can be her child, or an orphan has no parents at all. How easy it is to victimize these people. I can abuse them. I can cheat them on a business arrangement. I can pay them less because there's no strength. Poor, stranger, the guy from out of town, the migrant farmers, they come in. It's easy to cheat them. The society and government's not really there to protect them. The Hebrew faith gives very important statements that you will have compassion for everybody. If these people are unable to protect themselves, then you, as a member of the faith, you will protect them. And you will make sure these people are not victimized. I've got kind of an interesting thing. There's some odd, shall we say, laws involved here. And there's one that says don't cut corners. Don't cut corners. Okay. Leviticus 19 and 27. The reason why I'm laughing is it seems like it's so trivial. But as you look at it, it's something much more important than that. Do not cut the hair on the sides of your head. Let's go over here and get the rest of the quote. Do not cut the hair on the sides of your head or trim your, let's go back here, or trim your beard. What? Usually when this is interpreted, the sides of your head or the corner of your head are up here. So let your hair grow here. You never cut it. You can imagine, gentlemen, how long your hair can be after a while. Now, rather than having it hang down straight, sometimes they put it in ringlets. So it kind of twirls down so it doesn't hang down as far, but it's still there. And you don't trim, let's get the right terms here for you. You don't trim your beard. And usually that's the side of the beard. It's down on this is down here. You can imagine. Now, I remember when I was in high school, and I finally got some peach fuzz. Took a few years after that before I was shaving, believe me. But you can imagine, as an adult man, over years, over decades if you live that long. This can be a considerable length of hair and of your beard. I mean, to me, it'd be a pain in the neck. Also pain in the head and the pain in the face. You'd have to deal with this. Can you imagine trying to eat your soup? Got hair here, to take it like I take my tie and stuff it in my shirt or something like that, or pull it to the side or throw it over my shoulder, whatever you have to do just to have some soup for dinner. I guess you can get used to all kinds of fashion. Why does the Lord want you to look like a geek? Let's look at this. You retain the corners for the poor. Let's read on what else it says in Leviticus. This is chapter 19, verse 9. When you harvest your fields, let's come back here, do not cut the grain at the edges of the fields. Leave them for the poor and foreigners. Now, another question I need to ask, going back to the hair on the side of the head and the corners. Why does the Lord want you not to cut your hair? Because every time the breeze blows, every time you turn your head, every time you lean forward, you're going to see this. This is a constant reminder throughout your entire adult life that you do not forget the poor. If you own a field, you harvest the field, you leave the corners for the poor and for the foreigners to be able to come and eat. You will always allow for them to survive in your society, and they will not starve because you will make sure that they have enough to eat. Years ago, I had a conversation with Rabbi Wenger up in Salt Lake City, and I talked about this. I said, is my interpretation correct? He says, yes, it is correct. That is one of our interpretations as to why you're not supposed to cut the corner of your beard. Let's go back to Exodus. Remember, early Exodus talks about the Exodus. Talks about the Hebrew slaves leaving, and they go across the Red Sea, and they go across into Sinai. And Moses goes up the mountain and comes down with the Ten Commandments. But later in the book, we see more laws. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner. Now, this time the Lord gives you a little bit more broader definition. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner. Remember, you were foreigners in Egypt. Have you forgotten? Have the traditions of your family been lost? You know what it's like to be abused. You know what it's like to be overworked. How dare you think that with that experience you would forget what it's like? You need to remember who you are. You need to remember to do good. I do muck this up again. Won't be the first time. Do not mistreat or oppress foreigner. Foreigner, remember you were foreigners. Do not mistreat a widow and orphan. I already talked about this. Do not mistreat them. Treat them as you would anybody else. I already mentioned this, kind of repeating myself. Exodus 22, now we're in chapter 23, verse 6. Do not deny justice to a poor man. Remember my simple little thing I did here before? My quarter. I don't even buy things with coins anymore. They're worthless. But in Hebrew law, later Jewish law, you cannot deny justice to a poor man. Some of these other laws. I'm a big fan of Leviticus 19. There's a lot of good things in Leviticus 19. Do not curse a deaf man. Do not curse a deaf man. Why not? He'll never hear you. He can't hear you. He's deaf. He doesn't know. He can't say bad things about you. He can't retaliate. So a lot of the things that we often use as an excuse, if you will, or a reason not to do bad things, they're certainly gone in this case. Do you actually hurt a man when you curse him? When you degrade him? Oh, he might not hear it. Can we say that social attitudes? Can we say that those kinds of things in degrading human beings, it's easy to categorize them differently? That we can deny them justice? We can deny them toleration? When push comes to shove, can we hurt them? I mean, I remember when I was growing up. I'm not proud of this. We used to tell ethnic jokes. I think nobody's hurt. They're just funny jokes. But they are hurt. Not like slapping them in the face. But anytime you degrade another human being, you put them in another category, you're hurting them very badly. If I want to make fun of somebody, make fun of myself. Don't make fun of anybody else. The same kind of idea is actually expressed here. Do not curse a deaf man or put something in front of a blind man. Did I have there? Something in front of a blind man as to make him stumble over it. Now there's physical damage involved here. If you put something from in front of a blind man and trips over, it's going to hurt his shins, it's going to fall down. Of course, everybody's going to have a good laugh over it, right? There is damage done here. But let me say something a little bit broader about this. What does that mean about me? That I would take advantage of a deaf man or blind man? Should I not hold myself to a higher plane of conduct? I think I should. Do not take revenge. What? Let's read the entire quote. Do not take revenge on anyone or continue to hate him. But love your neighbor as you love yourself. Do not take revenge. You see, in the modern world, you and I have basic concepts of right and wrong. And if you are religious and you've been taught these kinds of things, we are taught in many religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, not to take revenge. See, that doesn't sound odd to us. We may or may not agree with it. We may or may not follow it, but it doesn't seem so terribly novel to us. But the time frame we're discussing, if you read about ethics, we'll talk about Aristotle later on, who wrote 2 books of ethics. The person I'm thinking of right now is Seneca, a Roman writer. And one thing he said is you never forgive your enemies. If you forgive your enemies, how do you seek revenge? See, this is common. A lot of people believe that. Let's get them for it. We say this is a different moral plane. Yes, it is. Do not take revenge on anyone or continue to hate him. So one thing about taking revenge, kick a guy who's kicked you. There's something else about having feelings about them, feelings toward them. Do not continue to hate them. But love your neighbor as you love yourself. I'm sure you heard the pastor and the priest and the reverend talk about this many times when you've been in church. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. When Jesus says this in the New Testament, he's emphasizing something that's already been talked about in the Hebrew Bible. Torture. I've already mentioned the Assyrians a little bit. They're bad dudes. Of course, there's a lot of bad dudes by our standards in the ancient world. Do awful things. They torture people. When we talk about Roman law later on in this course, I will talk about this to a certain extent, where I'm going to talk about that Rome as a legal system, Roman law, means you cannot take a deposition from a lower class person unless it was taken under torture. If you do not take it under torture, it's invalid in a court of law. Now, we have looked away from this in the modern world, where torture is a bad thing. It really took the Enlightenment in the 18th century to make a real big deal over this. Also, we find that in the Bill of Rights. No cruel or unusual punishments. But we say that's relatively recent. And among the ancient Hebrews, you don't torture back then either, where virtually everybody else did. Dislike war. I've talked about this. Let me come back and talk about it again. They don't like war. While virtually every other society, every other civilization, glorify the warrior and the defender and the men going out with their spears and doing a number on our adversaries and our enemies. The Hebrews do not glorify war. They really don't do this. Let's take this to the modern world. Go to the modern Hebrews, which we call Jews. You go into a lot of people's houses, and it's kind of fun, it's decorative. You'll see things on the wall like the crossed swords, or the old musket on the wall. Decoration. But are you glorifying war to a certain extent? Yes, you are. Can we say that's really not done in Jewish households? You don't have weapons of war, the crossed swords, the spears, the muskets on the wall. It's glorifying war. And I've already mentioned David was not allowed to build the temple because there's too much blood on his hands. Disliking war. I had a very interesting experience a long time ago now. This is several rabbis ago up at Kol Ami, the major synagogue in Salt Lake City. Kol Ami means all my people. It was Rabbi Silverman, if I remember. And he was invited to come down to BYU at that time, a long time ago now. 40 years ago to maybe 50, not that far, 40 years ago, where he was invited to come down and give a presentation about Judaism in front of the BYU student body. At that time, what you would do is you'd have a person give the presentation. I think they call it the devotional. And then they'd meet after this over at the Varsity Theater in the Wilkinson Center for a question and answer period. I don't remember what Rabbi Silverman said, but I was intrigued enough that I went to the question and answer period. And there was an officer, a man in uniform. And he's obviously an ROTC professor. And he asked a question. He says, Jews are vicious fighters. Oh, they are good. They're conquests in the Middle East. And one of the problems we have in the modern military is teaching people how to fight and how to kill. How do you do it so well as Jews? I swear, Rabbi Silverman slumped. He went. He gave what I consider to be a very appropriate answer. He says if you want to talk about people that were successful military commanders that happened to be Jews, I said that wrong. I can mention Judas Maccabeus or maybe Moshe Dayan. But for every important military leader that happened to be a Jew, I can list 10 Jewish moralists, thinkers, and teachers who have made decent contributions in how to live decent lives without going to war. Very, very well said. Do not like war. That's abundantly clear. Well, we're going to come back and discuss all these things, but as usual, I'm running out of time. We have a few other things to say about the Hebrew religion, and after that point, I will go on and discuss some other issues. In the meantime, I hope you're having a great day. I'm having a great day too. looking forward to laying on the couch and enjoying myself. In the meantime, enjoy yourself. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.